You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the FT's Whitehall editor, Sebastian Payne, and the Economist senior editor, Anne McElvoy. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. As the government reportedly prepares to make anti-COVID measures like mask wearing and social distancing a matter of personal responsibility rather than law, the Mail proclaims freedom is in your hands now. The Telegraph has the same story, again with the emphasis on individual responsibility. There's a backlash from the government's own scientific advisers who disagree that all restrictions should be lifted, according to The Guardian. The Sun links the goodwill towards the England football team with the happiness many people are likely to feel at the loosening of restrictions. And the Financial Times has word that China's internet regulator has banned the taxi app Didi for allegedly violating rules on personal data collection. And we're joined tonight by Sebastian Payne and Anne McElvoy. There they are, standing by. Welcome to you both. Good evening. Let's start with the Mail front page and that headline really talking about personal responsibility and saying that it's up to the individual now whether they decide to continue wearing masks or not. It will no longer be obligatory. Sebastian.
So this is the announcement that's coming from Boris Johnson tomorrow about the next stage of the easing of lockdown restrictions, which is due to take place on July the 19th. Now, we will get a formal indication on July the 12th whether this is actually going ahead. But this speech, or I should say press conference delivered by Boris Johnson on Monday, is effectively going to say, yes, the easing is happening on July the 19th, and we are going to move beyond the point of when the government tells you exactly what you can and can't do to the level of individual responsibility. The reason we're moving to this stage is clearly because of the massive success of the vaccination programme and the vaccines themselves, that over half of British adults have now been double jabbed and a very significant proportion been single jabbed as well. So when society opens up again and the coronavirus begins to spread rapidly, it will hit a wall of vaccinated people. That's the government's argument, but as I'm sure we'll get into, there's many other scientists who don't quite agree with that and think they are moving a little bit too quickly. But it is a remarkable change in tone from the government that even just a couple of weeks ago, when they had to delay that reopening from June the 21st to July the 19th, they were talking about the dangers ahead, the issues of the Delta variant and the need to be cautious. Now we're back to Boris Johnson's boosterism, accompanied by Sajid Javid, the new health secretary, with a full steam ahead approach. And as you said, the key things are the mandatory face mask will go, the 1 metre plus social distancing rule will be dropped, and it will no longer be law that you should work from home.
Yes, and Anne, the Telegraph also going with that story and the headline, use your judgment. The PM is urging us to do so. But as Sebastian was alluding to there, that the scientists have something completely different to say.
Well, this has always been the big argument, isn't it? Is really, do you say to people, once you start to get a high level of vaccination, take your own decisions, you take some risks, beware you're taking a risk. The scientific evidence has been rather cold on that and said, well, if you're going to deal with this and you're reaching a point where you're getting towards a strong immunity, but it's never complete. We do know even on 90% immunity, a fair number of people are going to catch COVID, and you're then kind of hoping against, I suppose, some of the trends that we've seen with the Delta variant, that you can catch any new variant of the disease as well as suppressing what you might call the original COVID that we all talked about a year ago. So this is really quite a gamble that the Prime Minister is taking here. I understand why he's taking it. It's a sign of how much he feels under pressure from businesses, from his own backbenchers. It's hard to, I think, to overestimate how much political pressure there is on the Prime Minister, and that they've modelled it. They've looked a lot at public opinion. Whatever people say, pro and con, people do often feel that it's just becoming too much. They've lived with it long enough and they want to have some of their liberties back. The Prime Minister has decided on this occasion to go with that hunch as opposed to going with his scientists. But no question there's disagreement on it.
Yes, indeed. And to The Guardian, and they're obviously quoting the number of cases that they're having risen to the highest level since January 2021. And again, the scientists saying that it's really, I think the quote was bonkers, to be taking the foot off the pedal, Sebastian. at this time in
But
particular.
of course, we've always had this debate with scientists on both ends of the spectrum saying that, there are risks involved in every turn of this. And there was a piece in the Mail on Sunday today by Sajid Javid, the new health secretary, who was pointing out the very tough economic and health costs of continuing to lock down. And it does feel as if the debate has shifted quite a lot, partly by his arrival replacing Matt Hancock, but also I just think the fact that, you can see the success of the vaccination program. The thing that I think the question that is going to have to be answered is, when we do reopen everything again and coronavirus starts to spread, we're going to see very high levels of infection. We're already at 24,000 cases a day, and it's not beyond the realms to expect that to easily double again when society is opening up. And I don't know how people are going to feel about that, because we've been living with this constant thing of infections that then lead to hospitalizations, but then lead to deaths. And I think one of the key messages that Boris Johnson will be saying on Monday is that, yes, we can have lots of infections, but thanks to the vaccines and thanks to other medical advances, that's not necessarily going to lead to hospitalization and further deaths from coronavirus. But it is going to be quite a big change in society. And I think that you will always see scientists on both sides. But the fact is, I don't think Boris Johnson is going to do anything that his chief medical officer, Chris Whitty, and the chief scientific officer, Sir Patrick Vallance, aren't going to go along with. There's a cabinet meeting tomorrow where they're going to sign off on this plan. And as I said, it won't be for another week until we get the formal go that this thing is going to happen. But there is a clear direction of travel. I think what is going to be interesting, though, is what is still recommended. And I think it's on the front page of the Telegraph. They're saying that, in fact, that it's still going to be recommended to wear face masks in tight, crowded spaces. And for one thing, whenever I get on the tube to go into work now in London, I'll probably still wear a face mask, because it's not the healthiest of environments at the best of times.
But Anne, still the messaging and also leading up to announcement next week to people has been that the pandemic is over, suggesting that, if you don't have to wear masks, you don't have to social distance, people will behave as if it is all over, and it clearly isn't.
The difficulty is, if you take that example, face masks is a very good example. Some people feel almost kind of ideologically about it. Others just feel, I find it probably increasingly a bit of a faff, frankly, and probably at the last minute leaving the house, I have to think, do I have it with me or not? So what happens then? How many of us then, on the whole, when we go into those crowded spaces, as Sebastian was describing, going into the tube, or maybe going into something that is a gathering where people are moving around in front of each other, social gatherings, which are rather different from sitting facing forwards, is how many of us do and how many of us don't. And I think that must be a worry if you're a behavioural scientist, because it's all right to say, make your own decisions and assess your own risk. But we do know that we tend to copy each other. We might be a bit resentful as human beings where we think, oh, God, do I have to do this again? But actually, we tend to do what most other people do most of the time. And trying to get to that balance is something I think will be difficult. I mean, one should reflect the other side of the argument, that we were told that if this vaccination worked, and the rollout has been very fast, it's still ongoing. There are still hiccups along the way. The Delta variant came along in the middle of it. People will say at some point, well, I suppose on the scientific evidence, we should never entirely give up on these restrictions at all. And at some point, you do have to live with COVID. And the question is, how do we live with COVID? It's not so simple as saying we just should live with it. What do we still have to sacrifice and what don't we?
Yes, and it's been reported that some of the scientists are apoplectic at the fact that Sajid Javid has likened it to dealing with the flu, Sebastian. In the Mail, they've got a double-page spread, and they're really pitting Sajid Javid, the health secretary, against the scientists, Sajid versus Sage doomsters.
Well, I think he didn't actually go directly to the flu. I think some of his remarks have been a little bit misconstrued, that we should just keep an eye on there, because obviously COVID is not like the flu. It is far more deadly. It spreads far more quickly. And I think anyone who does compare it to that has obviously missed the past year and a half of our lives, because we wouldn't have been in lockdown if coronavirus was just like the flu. It is a very interesting one for Sajid Javid, because he had noted some of the issues with lockdown and the health and economic effects a long time ago when he was is a backbench MP. But he's come into this job and either on his own authority or with the authority of Boris Johnson has taken a really different line to Matt Hancock, because Matt Hancock was very cautious at being very prescriptive in terms of how the rules should be followed, what the rules are, the importance of lockdown, where Sajid Javid is, literally from his first day going to the Department of Health, has been saying, we need to live with this thing, we need to get freedoms back as soon as possible. And of course, he's been a very lucky general in the sense that he's coming just as the vaccination program is, creating that wall of immunity around the country. But I think there is going to be a lot of disquiet. And if we do go ahead and we do see that rise of infections, you can imagine a lot of scientists saying, well, we told you so. But the real test for this is going to come in the autumn and winter, that once COVID starts spreading and it's made its way through the population, we've then also got the flu. We've also got this backlog. The NHS has a backlog of 5 million operations, which is huge. And that's got to be worked through. And Mr. Javid has said it is going to get worse before it gets better. So for me, that's not the real test. It's not about opening up now and what it does. It's, do we have to bring in measures later this year, which of course nobody wants to do. And the fact that he and Boris Johnson keep talking about the irreversibility of this plan shows that, that for them is the key focus as well.
Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me tonight, Sebastian Payne and Anne McElvoy. And we will take you through the papers, continue to go through the papers, starting this section with the Mail. And this story about the possibility of migrants being arrested for trying to cross the Channel. And this is to do with a new law to be announced tomorrow, Sebastian.
Yes, this is something that's been going on quite a long time, and a lot of right-wing campaigners, people like Nigel Farage, have been highlighting this, that over the past couple of months, thousands of migrants have been coming across the English Channel to the UK in these small dinghies, which is a very, very perilous journey that they make, and it's created a big problem for the UK border force, who don't really know how to manage it. And the people I've spoken to within government about this seem to say a lot of the issues are to do with France here, that normally the UK pays a lot of money and has various agreements that France stops people from leaving France and coming to the UK. That's not happening. So the Mayor is announcing tomorrow that there's going to be a new law that would basically allow migrants to be arrested who come over the English Channel. But I think this is a story that's been going on for quite a long time. I think it's one that could actually dominate the summer. And we have seen this before in the UK, but whereas in the past there was more cooperation with France, in the current times with the current state of Brexit and testy relations between France and London, it's a lot more difficult for Boris Johnson's government to fix this.
And should this be a criminal offence? Because these are asylum seekers.
Well, there are also asylum seekers who are coming from another country, which would be a safe country in Europe, largely. I mean, that is, I think, what Priti Patel is really aiming at here, the Home Secretary, with this, that yes, it is true that Britain has found itself in a difficult position, but this is not unusual. I mean, if you look across Europe, neighbouring countries or countries that sort of share a part of the sea and coastline where migrants are trying to sort of come through routes which are not through the asylum route, not through the formal asylum route, all have a problem of this nature. So the question really is, how would you go about it in a way that when Priti Patel talks about being safe and legal, I think what people will want to know who care about the asylum system is that the asylum system still works and that it is still intended to allow those who would have a genuine claim on asylum in the UK to get here, i.e. that it's not just a kind of battleshipping exercise to keep as many people out as possible. I think there's some more reassurance that we would need to have on that. But, she does have some sort of a point on what you call the pull factor in all of this. If you see those numbers going up, at first people will say, well, it's only a few people coming as illegal claimants for asylum. But those numbers go up very fast because people smugglers make an immense amount of money out of it. And so this legislation would be very tough towards them and would target them more. I still wonder how practical it is, because it would mean that some of these arrests with very draconian potential sentences would have to be made at sea. And that is something where I think border force and how that actually works in practice.
Yeah, the implementation is
potentially very difficult and actually quite dangerous. So I mean, I'm not giving it a clean bill of health, but I think I do understand why this has come about at the time it has.
But the implementation, as you suggest, might be problematic. Very quickly, Sebastian, how much would you pay for Euro semi-final tickets? The Mail is claiming some people are paying £5,000.
Not £5,000 is the answer to that. I actually loved watching the match with a couple of friends on Saturday evening. We'll probably do the same thing again, Sam. But yeah, there's some extraordinary sums of money being passed here, obviously, as England played an absolute blinder at the last match. And clearly everyone wants to be there for the semi-finals. But yeah, the rampant touting is always happens at these Euro games, and they try to do various things with photo ID and locking it to accounts, but it never really works. People always find a way of passing on the tickets. I would pay maybe a couple of £100, but
Okay.
I'm very happy watching a match at home.
Couple of hundred from Sebastian, and I suggest by your smile that you wouldn't pay £5,000 either.
I'm just laughing at the thought. I am the woman, viewers judge me as you will, who's signed their other half, who's been loving the football up to a dinner on the night. Of course, not even thinking that this could ever happen, that we'd get this far.
And Sebastian,
excitement.
Thank you so much. We shall see you in the next hour. Thank you for taking us through the paper.